The agenda this week examined a guaranteed annual income experiment. We considered the expectations of seniors in an aging Ontario and assessed the cabinet shuffle at Queen's Park. The agenda's week in review begins with our latest On the Road stop in Sarnia, Ontario. First up, how that community is confronting opioid abuse. Then a look at revitalizing Sarnia's economy. Brian, yours is obviously not the only community in the province of Ontario dealing with this, although you guys are, from what I've been hearing, neck deep in it right now.
That's right.
But give some advice to other communities around the province on what you've learned here and how it could be helpful perhaps for them.
Well, I think some of the things that I could glean from our experiences here, and again, it's hard to get a full 40,000-foot view all the time. I mean, I'm around addicted people every day of my life as well. So their personal stories, I think, are what speak volumes to me. And one of the things that I think is so important is that we, to Kathy's point, is that we have an opportunity here to tailor make the treatment program for the individual that works. I don't like it when I hear that somebody's been on methadone for 2 and 3 years. To me, there's a failure in a reintegration into what their productive life could look like. And having heard from some of those people, that's what they believe as well. When I look for the need for a detox and a treatment facility in our community, part of that is so that if there is an availability of a social network or a family network that could participate in tailor making that treatment program for that person, then I want to see that happen here. And maybe the train ride analogy I used earlier from an alcoholic friend of mine, maybe that wouldn't happen if there's a closer place for them to land when they come out. But I guess what I would learn from us is that if you've got a community that doesn't have full resources, but you have a corrections facility, make sure the corrections facility is addressing this as an illness and not a crime. So addiction should not be treated like a crime. Let's hope that I would say patients in the corrections facility have access to 12-step treatment programs, have access to mental health care as are needed. If those resources aren't available, you better be banging down the province's door to make sure that they're there.
Dale, let me get you to follow up. What have you learned here that is important for other communities across Ontario to know?
One thing I have to say is, it's important for other communities. It's also important for me to answer what Brian said. This assumption that people on methadone are not productive is completely incorrect.
I didn't
and
say
all
that.
the data shows. You said on methadone for 3 years. What's wrong with that? If they keep clean, if they get back with their husband, if they're not on the street anymore, if they're working, if they're back in school, it does not work for everyone. But 80 or 70, more than 75% of the people at our clinic that are on methadone or Suboxone are opiate free. That's not everyone, but it's a lot better than rehab does. It is something, unfortunately, that what we see is the support groups around people often suggest the same thing. Why are you still on that? You're fine, you're back to normal. Why would you still take it? And they feel pressure to get off. When they get off, the maintenance therapy is when the problems start. Now, lots of people get off maintenance therapy, and lots of people relapse. What should happen is this should be accepted as it is, which is the standard of care for opioid use disorder. It's considered that by every licensing body in the Western world. It's considered that by the World Health Organization. This is a very complex disease. It's a chronic disease. Nobody asks somebody to get off their insulin. Nobody asks somebody to get off their blood pressure medication. The problem is, as we all know in this room, there is a stigma around addiction, and our patients fight this all the time.
So we need to rethink.
Yes, and
that
every
angle.
community should be supporting addicts, people with these disorders, including those that happen to choose to be on an opiate replacement program.
Well, and that's exactly a point that I'm trying to make in all of this, is that this has to be there. I never would say that there isn't a place for methadone. Maybe having 3 for-profit clinics in a city this size can be a little concerning, and that's nothing against you. I had to deliberate on another clinic that was operating illegally for a number of years, and then we simply changed the bylaw and suddenly they were legal. I mean, that's a little concerning as to how that stuff perpetuates itself as well. My point is that if that's the only treatment or the perceived only treatment being given to, again, a number of patients that have spoken to me personally and directly, or a patient, let's say, who's 17 years old and was taking oxys for 3 weeks and then told that they needed to go on a withdrawal management plan with methadone, those things concern me. We need to, this is a piece of the puzzle. We need to ensure that the mental health care is there. We need to make sure that for those who are seeking 12-step programs have access to them. We need to make sure that when we're going to detox, when eventually we have a withdrawal management facility here, that we also have a treatment facility in place in this city to make that transition as smooth as possible.
I'm down to my last minute here, and Lori, I feel I should give it to you. We've had a good constructive conversation here about some of the problems, some of the potential solutions. What do you want people to take away from this discussion?
Opiates and fentanyl will kill you. There is no such thing as just one more time, or trying it for the first time could kill you. With the methadone clinic, it's another option. The Blue Water Health, it's options. The options and the help are there. If you really need help, or you know somebody that needs help, you have to fight to save their life and go to whatever option is available and what is going to work for them. There isn't one solution for everybody, but the drug will kill you.
Over the course of our history, we've shaped an economy. We were challenged by the change of the economy in Canada. We've stepped up, and we are very enthusiastically sharing this face of our community that is expressed in our local theaters. We express it artistically here with a local artist. We welcome people from other countries. As Judy talked about people coming internationally, I have many Chinese students living in my neighborhood because they actually board with people because they want to be part of our community. We're the right size for families internationally to send their kids here.
Well, let's check out those who haven't come here from a long way away. Let's check out one guy. You're from here, aren't you?
Born and raised.
Born and raised.
Yep.
And what do you do now besides the brewery?
When I moved back to Sarnia from school, I went to school in Toronto. I started a marketing company. And so that really gave me a lot of insight about what this kind of city needed. So we work with the county, the city, the college, and really help to target people that aren't from here to help them understand why this is a great place to come as well too. And the brewery, I guess, was a thing that we saw in a lot of other cities, and we saw it going very well for people our age. And so that really kind of fit into my overall strategy and my friend's overall strategy of something that would help Sarnia be the kind of place that people can be proud of.
Let me take you back to the end of university, because of course the one thing we hear frequently from many parts of Ontario is that their biggest export is young people. But you decided to come back.
Yeah, I was definitely seen as a strange person in Toronto because everyone was asking each other what they're doing after. I'm like, I'm going back to Sarnia, and the look of disgust on their face, like, why would you do that? There's no opportunity there. I was like, Sarnia is the greatest city in the world. Like, I have zero problem saying that anymore. And we've started a community of people where we've actually moved 12 of our friends from school and different connections there who have all moved to Sarnia and helped start the kinds of businesses that we're going on because of the size of Sarnia, there's very little barriers to actually be an entrepreneur and for the kind of opportunity that people are looking for in big cities. Everyone has a dream to start a brewery in a big city, and we just did it with no debt, with just a group of friends that said, we have a good idea, let's just do it. Everybody owns their home. You know, people are having kids here. Everybody can walk to each other's houses. So what we're doing in Sarnia is actually what everybody wants to do in the bigger city, but they just can't make it happen.
You know, what you say is not so crazy, because I do remember Jim Balsillie once telling me that after he graduated from Harvard, I'm going to Wall Street, I'm going to Washington, I'm doing this. He said, I'm going back to Waterloo. And they all thought he was nuts, and of course, all he did was go on to help BlackBerry get pretty big once upon a time.
We're getting a lot more of that now because of, especially downtown. It's cheap, it's affordable, there's a real buzz happening about entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, when we go back to the original question about attracting people, is probably the best direction for us, beyond bringing in students, is because it's self-starting and often it can bring many more jobs with it than trying to come in here and find a job. And we're going through that right now with Syrian refugees we're bringing in. Trying to find employment is a real challenge and get them to the place where they can be contributing to the community. But I agree with what's said here. I mean, we've always struggled with the image of the community. That's just a reality,
What do you
right?
think that image is?
Well, I think it's changed, but the word chemical, we make chemicals here, everything that we make here is needed in everyone's life. And yet the word chemical over the last couple of decades has taken a negative connotation. We certainly had, when I first became mayor, I was determined to change the image of the community. And it's been a very incremental uphill climb, but it's happened. We don't have the issues with the St. Clair River. The St. Clair River is going to be delisted as an area of concern on the Great Lakes in the next couple of years. The industry has done a lot. But that image is still there to some degree. But with what's happening with the college, our research park, we just announced we got a $200 million plant here that's taking corn and making it into car parts. Like, we're doing things here moving away from fossil fuels. So it's going to take time. But I'm cognizant. I came here as a child of immigrant Irish parents. We didn't know a soul in this community. We didn't know a soul in Canada. And when we came here, this was the most prosperous community in Canada, income-wise. So we've had to adjust to the fact that reality has changed. But when I'm seeing the dynamics in the community, it's an overused word, and every community says it, but it's true here. It's the collaboration between the different people, organizations.
Let's read an excerpt from the study that you wrote called The Town with No Poverty. This is from 5 years ago. Here's an excerpt on Mincome. We found that overall hospitalizations, and specifically hospitalizations for accidents and injuries and mental health diagnoses, declined for Mincome subjects relative to the comparison group. Overall, the measured impact was larger than one might have expected, when only about a third of families qualified for support at any one time, and many of the supplements would have been quite small. This we attribute to social interaction. All right, let's just sort of amplify that a little bit. How did social interaction add to the impact of this guaranteed annual income program?
Well, it's actually easier to explain if I talk about the educational effects than if I talk about the health effects. One of the things we discovered was that there was an increase in high school completion among Dauphin subjects over the period of Mincome. And if you think about a teenager, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, deciding whether to go back to school. Legally, they're able to leave school and to take a job. And we discovered by talking to some of the subjects that in low-income families, the boys especially, were under a fair amount of family pressure to become self-supporting as quickly as possible so that the family money could go to the younger siblings. When Mincome came along, a lot of those families discovered that they could afford to support their sons in school a little bit longer. But the child himself, the 17-year-old boy himself, deciding whether to go back to school for grade 12, is going to be concerned not only with whether his family can afford to support him, but what his friends are doing. So it matters that his friends are part of the program.
Interesting.
And so you get that kind of reinforcement. If you think about health, a lot of the accident and injury hospitalizations, for example, that would include things like car accidents. A lot of car accidents are alcohol fueled. So it depends on the level of alcohol abuse in the community, and that depends on how many people are participating in the experiment, what income levels are.
Interesting. So if they had more income, they were less likely to be in unfortunate social situations. Therefore, they might drive and drink less, and therefore fewer accidents.
Fewer accidents, fewer industrial accidents, because they're under a little bit less pressure to stay in dangerous work situations. If you think about farms, they're maybe a little less desperate to get the harvest out of the field, just simply because this program exists as a sort of insurance scheme. You can also, accident and injury hospitalizations are also picking up the effects of family violence. And again, the lack of income is a key stressor for families, which may very well lead to poor outcomes for families.
How about the impact on mental health cases in Dauphin, Manitoba? Could you come to any conclusions about that?
That was a huge impact. It was a huge driver. The actual hospitalizations in Dauphin relative to the control group fell by 8.5%, which is a massive amount. And a large portion of that was due to a reduction in mental health hospitalizations. And I think it has to do with the removal of stress from families. The existence of an income insurance scheme goes a long way towards making people's lives just a little bit easier, a little bit more comfortable.
This program only lasted for 4 years in Dauphin, Manitoba, is that right?
That's right.
4 years. Are you at all concerned that that is too small a space of time in which to come to any kind of far-reaching conclusions?
It's always an issue when you run this kind of an experiment. People don't necessarily behave the same way when they know that an experiment is temporary as they would if it were a permanent rollout of a policy. So it's entirely possible that the short-term effects would be either accented or attenuated if it were expanded. I think that in terms of the health and educational effects, I think that the results we saw were very much the effects we would see if there were a general program rollout.
How do you know that it wasn't all just coincidental?
Well, it was actually a fairly sophisticated statistical design. I did create a matched control group. My subjects received the income support, but my controls were as similar to the people in Dauphin as I could possibly make them. So they lived in similar kinds of towns, they lived in similar kinds of families, they were the same age and sex, they were exposed to the other things that might have led to those kinds of effects. So it was the difference between the subject and the control group that's really significant.
Sylvia, I wonder if you could paint for us a picture of what life is like for a senior who fits the definition in this country of being quote-unquote low income.
So let me begin by saying I think the figures that we have established for low income in terms of 16 to 19,000 for a single individual, and it's unfair because we don't double them. So by the time you take off rent, depending on where you live in this province, or some type of living expense, if you own your own home and you're that fortunate, then you have taxes. The fact of the matter is you're going to be insecure. You're going to have food insecurity. You're going to have a very, very small cushion, if anything, for emergencies. You've talked already about issues with respect to potentially declining health and drugs that you're going to need. And if you have children and you have grandchildren, I mean, you're literally having to face situations where, will I buy some groceries or will I get them a gift? I don't think that's the quality of life issues that we're talking about. So I think as you get into larger and larger cities where the costs of living are higher, or in the very remote north where the costs are very high in terms of food, those challenges compound themselves. So I don't think it's the golden years anymore.
Let me follow up though, Sylvia, with this. I think before a lot of the income support programs for seniors were brought forward by various governments at both levels over the years, as many as a third of the seniors in this country were living in quite appalling conditions. I think that number today is 7%. So these income support plans have worked. Is that not right? And there are more golden years for more seniors in this country now?
I think that what we're doing is there's certainly increased support by government, but really when you lower the standards, when we talk about quality of life issues and we talk about what kinds of things can you participate in, do you have any disposable income? I think that there are seniors. I mean, I read Wen's editorial the other day, or her column, where she said that too many people who are well-to-do and have pensions, a lot of money, are sort of getting, the income supports that we provide seniors. But I think that people who really need it, who haven't had that kind of life, who haven't been able to save, are in fact suffering. And I think the conversation that the panelists just had in terms of, we didn't. That we're trying to make smart moves, but everybody, we're doing things across the board, and the part of the population who are living below that line consistently is something that we should be addressing.
In which case, Louise, I keep hearing about a desire, I think the Canadian Medical Association has put it out there, for a national senior strategy. I don't even know what that means. What does that entail?
Oh, heavens, I wish I knew. And I think we need to be very careful because you can't look at seniors as if they're kind of, aside from the rest of the population. So we also hear the federal government talking about a national pharmacare strategy. Okay, that's an interesting concept. Where will seniors fit into that? I think we need to be really careful that we don't try to silo populations when really what we need to be looking at are strategies across the continuum of healthcare for everybody.
Well, let's understand a little more what that means. Ghazi, I mean, we've talked about prescription drug benefits right now. Beyond the area of health support, What might a national senior strategy also entail?
Well, a senior strategy should not be focused or certainly not confined to health, because that gives a wrong signal that old age and ill health are synonymous. So that is not the right thing. There are a lot of things now which seniors need. They should be provided opportunities for active aging, like employment opportunities, volunteerism, and also the formation of associations of seniors. At the same time, there should be financial security that would cover the pensions area. And then there would be other infrastructural improvements required for making life of seniors more easy and improve their mobility.
Darren, as the baby on the panel here, I do
Love
like
to hear that at this age. I actually do. Just sad. Go on.
I mean, you're probably a quarter century away from having to face these issues, but I'm always curious as to young people today, what they think will still be around for them when they turn 65. Do you think about that at all?
You know, honestly, for my own generation, to be perfectly honest, I think most of us don't think about that, in the sense that we don't really think about these programs being around. We, oddly enough, and this goes to what a lot of people on the panel have actually said, we've known this age wave was coming for a long time. And I think for whatever reason, most of my friends, my peers, you know, it really has been drilled into our head that these programs may not be sustainable. And so I think most of us have kind of lived our lives, at least those who are lucky enough to be in professions to allow yourself to do so. We've done more or less what Michael's been talking about to try and not have to rely on these programs. In some ways, that may be a bit of a mistake. Not that you should rely on the programs, but rather that we should perhaps be looking at this more carefully and trying to encourage government to take this seriously, to ensure these programs remain on the books by the time we're going to need them. Because the nature of what funds retirements has changed. I mean, Michael has talked about the need to invest in RSPs, the need to invest with, say, your TSFAs. I agree with all of that.
TFSA.
TFSA. Right you are. I still agree with it. But the point is that, unfortunately, those vehicles really only serve people who have the disposable income to do that. So it's easy to say, well, if everyone simply invests in these products, they'll be fine in the long run. Not everyone is in position to be able to do that. They're
but
not
do you
in
think the
jobs that allow
CPP
them
will be
to.
around for you when you're 65?
I actually do. I mean, I'm not as pessimistic as some other people are with respect to this. I do think that when push comes to shove and governments are forced with crises, they react. I think we've now reached the point where this is becoming a crisis. Governments are going to react, and they're going to have to adjust the social safety net accordingly. And so I do think it will probably be there.
This is a bit of an historic day at Queen's Park. So, Martin, start us off. The overarching theme you would find in this shuffle is what?
Well, the government wants to cast this as a reboot, a rejuvenation, but we can't think of this as a one-day wonder on TVO tonight or in the Toronto Star tomorrow. It's about where does this position them 2 years from now? Because this is all about winning. It's about recasting, it's about rebranding, but it's about trying to find the right balance of gender, geography, ethnicity as well, and just finding out how do they win and how do they avoid the problem, the trouble spot politicians, get them out of the line of fire and bring in people who are more reliable.
On that list of criteria, I did not hear merit and/or competence. Was that, are you suggesting, not part of the equation?
I think it has to be in terms of avoiding accidents, political accidents, and I don't think it's the preeminent part of deciding who gets into cabinet. One hopes they are all reasonably competent, but there are so many other factors that go into the mix.
Okay. Allison, what did you see this morning from the shuffle?
I think the two biggest promotions, two of the biggest surprises were Mitzi Hunter to education. She previously was Associate Minister for Finance, so she had the responsibility for bringing in the ORPP. I guess Wynne would argue she's done a good job with that, and hence this big promotion. Glenn Thibeault moves from the backbenches to energy. So those are sort of the two big winners, I would say. And Tracy McCharles was really the main, if only, demotion that I saw. She was removed as Minister of Children and Youth Services, and she keeps Minister responsible for women's issues, gets another minister responsible for a portfolio, but loses that main cabinet portfolio.
Consistent with you don't know the players well at the program when you go to a baseball game, let's just go through some of the highlights right now. Sheldon, let's bring up this graphic. There are, I guess the big news was 7 new ministers in this government, 7 rookie ministers off the backbench. 5 women, 2 men. There are now actually, if you count it up, more MPPs in the Liberal government sitting in cabinet than in the backbench. That's a bit unusual. And nobody was forced out of cabinet. Everybody who was in before is still in, save and except, of course, for the 4 who resigned of their own volition this past week. And again, following up on what Alison had to say, here's some of the highlights when it comes to names you might be seeing more of in the future. Glenn Thibeault, remember, got elected in that very controversial by-election in Sudbury. He's the new Minister of Energy, a very tough portfolio. Liz Sandals, no longer the Education Minister. Now the President of the Treasury Board will be counting the government's pennies as they spend them over the next couple of years. Yasser Naqvi, 20 years ago, started law school. Today he's the Attorney General of the province of Ontario. A few high-profile people didn't move, including Eric Hoskins as Minister of Health, Charles Sousa in Finance, Glenn Murray in Environment. Mitzi Hunter, as you just pointed out, Alison, is the new Minister of Education, responsible for spending $22 billion of education dollars. A couple of rookies we should pay attention to. Eleanor McMahon, plucked off the backbenches, now Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and Indira Naidoo-Harris, who was a backbencher before, now gets that responsibility for the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan. 7 new rookie MPPs into cabinet, that's a lot in one fell swoop. Again, what's being said here?
It is a lot. Kathleen Wynne always has tried to not bring in rookies straight from election day. She believes they need to be seasoned and tested a little bit. A big push of this was trying to get closer to gender parity. There was a bit of a misapprehension that she was looking for 50-50. That wasn't really possible. Justin Trudeau was able to do it. He had a much bigger pool of MPs to choose from in Ottawa, and he was starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. Kathleen Wynne inherited much of the old Liberal team.
From McGuinty.
From McGuinty. I think with a couple of those new ministers, geography and gender really are paramount. They are in swing ridings, and those are important to the Liberals come in the next election. I think the biggest single surprise for trivia buffs and political nerds, as you often describe us, is Chris Ballard, a white guy from Newmarket, is in cabinet. And you ask yourself, why? Has he distinguished himself? I don't want to pick on him and say that he hasn't, but I think he's in a tough riding. He won it he snatched it from the Tories, from Frank Cleese. And so that's what goes into shaping it. Glenn Thibeault, the new Democrat who didn't cross the floor, switched, resigned, and changed houses from Ottawa to Queen's Park, I think comes in with a pretty strong CV, interesting background before politics and in politics, former journalist made good. And so he's one who I think is going to be one to watch.
Laura Albanese, another former journalist,
yes,
made good.
Correct.
As an anchor on Omni. She's now in for the first time as well.
And let's not forget the other anchor who made it, Indira
Naidoo-Harris, actually used to work here.
There's a future for television anchors in politics.
Maybe. And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety at TVO.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.